Story 1. It was a Thursday night. I was up late looking at some soccer stuff on Craigslist like soccer boots and goalkeeper gloves. It was a summer's night. I was 15 and I had no job, which means I had basically no money, so I was trying to find the cheapest deal possible. I didn't really mind about what condition they were in or anything. After scrolling for some time, I came across an ad that seemed like such a steal. The picture showed everything I was looking for: the soccer boots and the goalie gloves, and they even looked in good condition, and it was only listed for $40, and that seemed too good to be true. I contacted the seller via text and he asked me a few questions. One of the questions was how old I was. I of course told the truth and said 15. He then replied, he's glad to hear that I'm dedicated at such a young age. It didn't seem weird to me what he said at the time, but now I look back on it, I should have been wiser and realized it was weird. But anyway, I was about to ask the seller for his address, but he asked me for my address first. I didn't know how I felt about this, but instead I told him my town. He said he would meet me, and we both agreed on meeting at some parking lot of the local Walmart, which is pretty close to my house. I then stood alone in the parking lot for a while. Then all of a sudden I heard somebody toot their horn. Then I noticed a black van parked across the car park away from all the other cars, and I then received a text from the seller saying that he was in the white van. I replied to him telling him to come out with the soccer boots and gloves. He then replied no, and he said it would be easier to do the transaction in the van. I had a very bad feeling about this, and I decided to run off back to my house. While I was running, I noticed the black van speeding down the street following me, and that's when I noticed there was another person in the passenger seat. I didn't want to lead them back to my house, so I ran into a random person's backyard and hopped over the fence. After I hopped a few fences, I was on the opposite side of the block, and I was hiding in the bush. Then within the next 30 seconds, the black van passed the bush, and it turned left, and it was then out of sight. I waited for a few minutes. Then I ran back to my house. My parents went mad at me when I told them what happened, and they were mad because I didn't get the plate on the van and I didn't get a good look at their face. I then thought of the idea of showing them the Craigslist ad, but by the time I went to show them the ad, it was taken down. So the only thing we had to report was that there was a suspicious black van in the area. A few hours passed. I was in my bed trying to sleep. Then I heard a vehicle engine running outside. I then peeked outside my window, and I seen the same black van sitting there across the street. But as soon as I looked, it sped off down the street, and I haven't seen it since. I don't know how they got my address because there is no way they could have followed me without me realizing. I will update you if anything else happens. This is a popular story with my family and most of my friends. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend at the time of this story. She was looking for her first apartment and moving out of her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move together since they'd only been dating for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like, "Roommate wanted, females only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most of the other places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable with living with any males. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place. However, the listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and toured the house. Within 30 minutes, she receives an email back with all the details and time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at 8 p.m. When Amanda arrives, there's a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken use, back door." Walking around the house, it looks nice but slightly unkempt. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, etc. Still no alarms for Amanda, though. When she knocks on the back door, an older man opens the door. At first, Amanda thinks that she has the wrong house, but the man reassures her and says that the occupant was out and that he was the landlord. The occupant asked him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant and offered to show her around. Start going off, but are net red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s, unshaven, and looked like he lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda noticed one huge red flag. No furniture, nothing. The landlord was polite about answering questions, but seemed irritable to keeping the lights on for too long, rushing her around and only letting her look at rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walked down the hall into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it, quote-unquote broken, for sure. Amanda's creepo meter is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave, but trying to be polite. As she's given the guy her thanks for the showing bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. He claims it's recently furnished and would be a great rec room, and she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opens the door, it opens outward, secretes something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is pitch black. He smiles, motions down the stairs and says, "Ladies first." What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers her phone. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." With the motion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out of the back door. She says the guy just looked at her like he was confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When Amanda got home, she told her mother and my brother everything. Cops were called. They took her statement and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed, the house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier, and the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closed room that the so-called landlord didn't want her to look in was where the man had been staying. There was a pile of old dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. More creepy was he had plastered ripped-up pages from porno magazines on all the walls in the room. The really scary part of this was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine at about shin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was empty except another pile of old blankets, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with a few rolls of assorted tape. Story 3. I live in a large city, but my parents live in a smaller town about 3 hours away from me. My mom retired recently, and she's always been good at keeping busy. She's been using Craigslist to declutter her house from all the junk that my brother and I accumulated over the years. Every now and then, she gives me a few bucks for things that she sold that were apparently mine. She's always has been very generous. I honestly wouldn't mind if she just kept it all, but it's always a nice surprise whenever it happens. Another thing that she likes to do on Craigslist is trade books. She was a school librarian, so she really likes vintage copies of classic literature. Finding something special or rare online is like a game for her. That's where I come in. Since I was in the city, some of the good deals that she found will be close to me. She'd often ask me to make trades for her, and then I would give them to her whenever we would see each other. Next one day, I got a call from my mom. She told me that she was talking to someone from Craigslist who had an old copy of The Great Gatsby, one of her favorites. She had agreed to trade for some books that I still had at my place from a previous trade. She set up the meeting just down the street from my apartment. It was no problem for me, so I told her I would get the book and save it for the next time she came to visit. I left my apartment and walked down the street to the corner where she told me to go. When I got close, I saw a young guy standing there holding a small book that must be him. I thought he was a younger guy, probably my age if not a few years younger. He was tall and thin with long hair, looked like he belonged in a heavy metal band or something. Not exactly what I was expecting for someone dealing in vintage books, but who am I to judge? I walked up and introduced myself. We shook hands and he told me his name was Brett. Then we made the trade. After that, we went our separate ways. I didn't think much of it, and then I went back home. When I walked into my apartment, I threw the book onto my desk and forgot about it for a few days. When the weekend came, I decided to take a look at the book. I had never read it, but I had seen the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, so I decided to give it a chance. I picked it up and flipped through the pages, and then something fell out. It looked like one of those old Polaroid photographs. I had never seen one in person. I only recognized it from watching old movies. It landed on the ground face down, and when I picked it up, I almost lost my lunch. It was hard to be sure, but it looked like a picture of a dead body. There was a man lying on the floor of what seemed like a hotel or a motel room, and he was covered in blood. I thought it was some kind of sick joke at first. Think it was a prop for a show or something. Maybe that guy Brett was making a horror movie. That's what I thought at the time anyway. I thought about it for a minute or two, and I decided that I needed to call the police. It's better to report it and find out that it's fake rather than ignore it. And it turns out to be real. I called 911 and told the operator what happened. He seemed to take it seriously and sent an officer to me. I went to the station and filed a report. We got my mom on the phone to see if she could track down Brett. She had only communicated with him through email, and he wasn't replying. The officers were not able to tell for sure if the picture was real, but they promised to do more analysis on it. It's been just over 2 months, and I still haven't heard anything back from the police. And I still don't know if the picture was real. This was one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. Was I face to face with a murderer? If so, why would he put that picture in there? An accident, maybe? Or maybe he was toying with me like it was some kind of sick game to show someone what he had. Thank you guys for watching. Remember to subscribe, like, and follow my other socials down below, and send your true stories to my email down below.